Hello and welcome to the June Horoscope Live. My apologies for how late I was today. We were having oh my goodness, it was like a poltergeist had grabbed everything that it could and created as many obstacles and difficulties as it could. And I have to tell you something. We were very ready to call in, I don't know, a priest to conduct an exorcism or something along those lines. But anyway, I really want to thank all of you for being here and for your patience. And I especially want to thank my producer, Joe G, for his extreme patience. Joe is canonized as far as I'm concerned already. So whenever you're in a technical plight, you feel free to pray to Joe Santos, the living saint among us. But anyway, my apologies. I'm so glad to see all of you here today. And without further, before we start let me remind you that this Monday, we will be dropping another Christopher Renstrom astrology episode. This is open to all the audiences on YouTube, and this will be Uranus forming a square to the nodes, and that comes out this Monday. Uranus forming a square to the nodes is actually an episode I'm rather proud of. We get into the nodes a little bit and their history. And of course, this is going to be Uranus square the nodes times all 12 signs. And so there's a lot of information, a lot to look forward to. And as I said, I'm really proud about the way the episode sounds and the way that the episode looks. So please make a point to check that out this Monday, which is in a couple of days. And without further ado, we're going to take a quick break, and then we will be back here for the June horoscopes live. Hello, and welcome back to our live presentation of the June horoscopes. On June 1st, Mercury enters the zodiac sign of Cancer. Now, you may notice you're having trouble dragging yourself out of bed in the morning, that you're spacing out in mid-conversation, or you're desperate to take a cat nap during your lunch break. You might even be wondering, did you suddenly develop narcolepsy? Well, the answer to that is no. But drowsiness is the order of the day when Mercury, planet of the mind, is traveling through the realm of the moon. Don't try to fight those droopy eyelids by fueling up with caffeine or Red Bull, because you'll only make matters worse. This is your unconscious's way of getting you to unplug. At the very least, you'll wake up from your nap feeling renewed and regenerated. Then again, you could reemerge from your slumbers with a fascinating idea or a fresh take on an old problem. People with strong lunar energy do some of their best thinking in their sleep, as will you when Mercury is in the zodiac sign of Cancer from June 1st until August 9th. Signs most affected are Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Virgo, Scorpio, and Pisces. On June 2nd, the Sun will form a sextile to Saturn. Now, don't be shy about sharing aspirations, because you may pique the interest of someone who can make those dreams of yours come true. Now, this person that I'm talking about won't do all the work for you, but they can certainly give you pointers on how to get started, or put you in touch with those people who can show you the way. Just remember that it's up to you to follow through on what you put into motion today. Someone can open a door, but only you can walk through it. Signs most affected are Aries, Gemini, Leo, Libra, and Aquarius. On June 3rd, Mercury will form a square to Neptune. You'll be seriously tempted to make an enormous personal sacrifice, but don't. Today's Mercury-Neptune square shows that things aren't what they seem. Now, the problem isn't that someone has misled you. The problem is that the person you believed in is being misled. Now nothing is so dire that you can't wait to see how all of this will unfold. And given that Mercury will be turning retrograde on June 29th, you have more time than you think to see how all of this will play out. There's also a very good chance that the steep price you're ready to pay today will be rendered null and void by then. Signs most affected are Aries, Gemini, Cancer, Virgo, and Pisces. On June 8th, there will be a last quarter moon in the zodiac sign of Pisces. That feeling that you have that things have been played out, that every alternative was entertained and every option explored, can leave you feeling defeated and directionless. Ironically, it's times like these that present us with the greatest opportunities. Why? Because you know that you can't possibly go back to the way that things were. And it's because you can't retrace your steps that you are forced to create new ones. You probably have no idea of what comes next, and that, believe it or not, is a great place to be. It's been a long time since you faced an empty canvas, so close your eyes and just start sketching. You'll be surprised and impressed by what your imagination comes up with now that it's free to do what it does best, which is imagine. Signs most affected are Gemini, Cancer, Sagittarius, and Pisces. On June 9th, Venus will form a conjunction to Jupiter in the zodiac sign of Cancer. There is a difference between looking and finding, and this week you'll discover how many of the things you yearn for are actually close at hand. Benefics always bring wonderful things, and this conjunction of Venus and Jupiter in the zodiac sign of Cancer promises to move your hopes and dreams off the shelf and into your shopping cart. If you don't see it for yourself, then ask your friends, because they will be more than happy to point it out to you. It's rare when these sorts of things just fall into your lap, but that's what happens when Jupiter is exalted in the zodiac sign of Cancer. Signs most affected are Taurus, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. On June 10th, Mercury forms a square to Saturn. Things aren't going to come together as quickly as you had hoped. Evidently, the person you're crushing on will be busy taking care of unfinished business, or the seller you're dealing with is going to have to put things on hold. Obstacles to your happiness are to be expected when Mercury forms a square to Saturn, the planet of detours and delays. Most people would call it a day and move on to something else. But you are not like most people, because when you find a fit that truly works, then you will do whatever it takes to make it happen, even if that means having to wait. Signs most affected are Taurus, Cancer, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. On June 14th, there will be a new moon in the zodiac sign of Gemini. Now, you're going to feel pulled in all kinds of directions, which is why it's important for you to remain centered. Centered doesn't mean you have to be clear on what you want, or that you even have to know what you're doing, because that's the last thing you'll be feeling with the new moon in Gemini, so close in proximity to Uranus, the planet of revolution and change. Centered means being there for yourself and refusing to let circumstances or people throw you off balance. This will be one of those times when things are on, off, and then back on again, probably within minutes of each other. Think like a tree and bend with the winds of change, and you won't be uprooted. Signs most affected are Gemini, Cancer, Virgo, Libra, and Aquarius. Now we move on to what I call the Venus bundle. That is Venus entering the zodiac sign of Leo, followed by a series of aspects to other planets. Now, when I was looking at this Venus bundle, I really thought long and hard what would really communicate the idea of Venus in Leo, and Venus in Leo making all of these aspects to the modern planets. And the idea that came to mind was actually a story. It's one of my favorite myths. It is the myth of Pygmalion. I don't know if you're familiar with that myth from Ovid, but it goes something like this. Once upon a time, there was a sculptor named Pygmalion, a young fellow, maybe in his late 20s or something, who had seen women in his community living shameful lives. And so he turned his back on all of this display of their bodies and their riches. And he just really felt they were all so vulgar. Maybe they dressed trashy. But in any case, he turned his back on this display that they were making of themselves. And he worked on something that he loved more than anything else. And that was an ivory statue. An ivory statue that he named Galatea. And this statue that he sculpted had greater beauty than any woman possibly could have. And over time, as he worked on the statue, he fell in love with it. He kissed her, and he fancied being kissed back. And he spoke to her, and he imagined her talking back to him. Indeed, they had many conversations where he paid her compliments. And her, being a statue, remained silent and unmoved. Over time, he brought her presents that women love. Presents like smooth pebbles and winding shells, little pet birds, flowers with 1,000 colors, lilies, and painted balls and lumps of amber. He decked the statue out in dresses, and he adorned her fingers with rings, which he put on, and he brought her a necklace, earrings, and a ribbon for her bosom. And even all of these things, which were so beautiful and lovely and showed such great taste, they all became her. They all made her look beautiful. But even with all of these lovely things, she looked even more delightful and beautiful naked because she was pure. And so over time, he took out a crimson coverlet and he spread it out on the ground, and he would take the statue and he would tilt it. You know, he obviously was very strong, and he would lie the statue down on the coverlet and he would sleep beside her every night, whispering "my darlings" and all sort of secret nothings into her ears. Now, there came a time when there was a Venus holiday. That means that in the village where Pygmalion lived, they celebrated the blessings of Venus, their goddess. And so on this holiday, Pygmalion prayed to the goddess Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, that she might bring Pygmalion a wife who looked like his marble statue. And Venus, seeing that his love was deep, profound, and sincere, answered his prayers, but not in the way that Pygmalion had assumed. So one evening, when Pygmalion lay down beside the statue again, and he kissed her goodnight, the statue sighed a luxurious sigh. Pygmalion was surprised, and he touched her shoulder, and he felt the ivory soften beneath his fingers, like wax softening in the hot sun. Pygmalion was drawn to the statue, and he stroked the statue with his hands because, after all, he had sculpted it. And as he stroked the statue, he discovered it became a living, breathing body in his own hands, that the statue's kisses were now human, that the kisses were real, the blushes warm, and the statue's eyes, Galatea's eyes, finally opened and gazed upon him with a smile. After a time, they were married, and they even had a daughter named Paphos, which means passion, in honor of the goddess Aphrodite. This, as you might know, was the origin or the premise for George Bernard Shaw's play Pygmalion, which was made into a marvelous musical and then a film called My Fair Lady. My Fair Lady begins with the well-to-do crowd of London leaving the opera and looking around for a carriage or a cab. And so as they're doing this and a rainstorm hits, everyone is sort of gathered under the columns of this pavilion, and they're waiting for their cab or waving to a carriage, and the carriages are like all full, sorry. And during this sort of confusion, a flower girl shows up. And she shows up with a basket of flowers, and she offers flowers to each of the patrons. And they all say no, they're all busy. They're all hectic, you know, like sort of New Yorkers trying to see a cab in the rain and flag it down. They're much more concerned with things like that. But one of the people in the crowd notices that as the girl is talking, and she's talking really dreadfully, I mean, it's a very heavy Cockney or something. She's like, mister, will you have some flowers? It's a beautiful orchid here. You know, something along those lines. One of the patrons notices that there's a fellow hidden behind a pillar who's writing down everything she says. And he says to her, you know, you're being checked out by the police. And she immediately panics, and she goes and she confronts this person behind this pillar. And she's like saying, I'm not doing anything illegal. How dare you ask these things? I can sell flowers as long as I stay off the curb. And the fellow looks at her, and it's an older gentleman in a tweed suit and a cap. And he's like, oh, hush, you silly little creature. I'm not writing down anything for the police. I'm writing down what you say, because what you say is of immense fascination to me. It's so dreadfully awful that I don't think I've ever heard anyone with such a dreadful accent as yours. And the flower girl responds, oh, you think it is so? How pretty, you know, because she completely confused what he was saying with a compliment. He introduces himself as Professor Henry Higgins. And what he does, there's another patron of the opera who overhears him, Colonel Pickering. And he's like, you are Professor Henry Higgins? And he's like, yes, I answer to that name. And Colonel Pickering, it says, I am Colonel Pickering. And Henry Higgins says, oh, you are the expert in Sanskrit in 24 different dialects. I've read your papers all the time. And I have read your papers, Higgins, all the time on the science of phonetics and reconnecting speech. In fact, I was on my way to see you. And so the two gentlemen are very happy to meet one another. And during that time, Eliza, which is the name of the flower girl, presents her flowers and says, would you buy, some flowers? And they're like, and Higgins says offhandedly, I could take a girl like this and I could pass her off as a duchess within 6 months. It wouldn't be hard for me to do. And Pickering is like, really? And he's like, absolutely. I could absolutely do that because of this style of phonetics that I'm teaching. And so Pickering is like, oh, that's amusing. And he's like, and of course, if I did this, this girl could leave behind this flower girl street vending that she does and maybe get a job at a boutique or a shop or something along those lines. But anyway, what an amusing fancy. And let's walk home. And so the gentlemen do. But as they do, Eliza follows them, and she sees exactly where Professor Higgins lives, and she returns a couple of days later, all dressed up in what she thinks is fancy and what she thinks would look flattering. And of course, when the maid answers the door, she is absolutely shocked because Eliza looks absolutely tacky and hideous. Now, on June 15th, Venus, after it enters Leo, and Leo, as you know, is basically the sign of theatrics and the sign of romance and loveliness. And Venus in Leo is what we call a golden Venus in astrology. It's very attractive, it's very magnetic and charismatic. And the thing about having a Venus in Leo, should you have one in your chart, is that you could attract the fancy of people who see you as something different than you are. They might see in you a beauty that's yet to be brought out, or a wit that's yet to be cultivated. And so this is where Venus, the sign of attraction, can attract the interest of people who can do something for you. And these people, in response, want to do something for you because they might see you as someone they want to mentor, or someone they want to make more beautiful or more comely, or maybe even mentor or a pet project. So when Venus moves into the zodiac sign of when Venus moves into Leo and forms a sextile to Uranus in the zodiac sign of Gemini, what's interesting here is that Uranus is going to enlighten the Venus. It's going to help the Venus to advance in society or to raise her rank. And indeed, Eliza comes to Higginson's house a number of days later, ready to commission him to teach her how to speak like a fine lady, which is just dreadful. He's like, no, that's and so she does. And it's at that moment when she's kind of making a fool of herself that Colonel Pickering says, you know what? Higgins, I'm going to wager you a bet. I'm going to take you up on your offer that in 6 months you can pass her off as a duchess, and we shall see whether you will be successful or not. And Higgins is like, what a marvelously insane idea. Yes, let's do it. And Eliza's like, you're going to teach me lessons. He's like, I'm going to do more than teach you lessons. You're not going home. You're moving in. I'm moving in. You're moving in. We're going to get you a bath. I never take a bath. I know you smell like it. We're going to get rid of these horrible clothes, and we are going to transform you into a duchess in 6 months. And she's like, oh, no. And so like Higgins calls his maids, and they take up Liza. They take her up to a room where they take off her clothes. They throw her into a bath. They, bathe her. She's screaming the entire time. And they put on something that at least is presentable, so that when she comes downstairs, Professor Higgins begins on teaching her how to speak. He begins by teaching her off these reels that he's recorded, where he's recorded different people with different accents, and they're speaking in different ways, and he's teaching her how to say A, E, I, O, U. And her version is A, E, I, O, U. and he's like, no, and so he drills this into her over and over and over for day after day, morning, noon, and night, and day after day, goes into week after week, and goes into about a month or two. And finally, it's like 3 a.m. They're completely exhausted. And Henry Higgins is like, please go over this phrase one more time. And she's like, oh no, I can't. And he's like, what? Just say this phrase. We've worked on it all week. And she's like, the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. And he looks at her and he's like, what? She's like, yes. And he's like, say it again, one more time. One more time, please. And she says, the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. Now try it with H's. Hurricanes hardly happen in Hampshire. What was that again? Hurricanes hardly happen in Hampshire. And he's like, that is brilliant. You've done it. You've done it. She's like, I've done it. He's like, and then that's when she bursts into song, of course, which is The Rain in Spain, sung by Marnie Nixon. The rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. She sings it better than that. And they do this huzzah moment where they realize, oh my goodness, she's finally broken through. She can finally speak and she sounds like a lady. And this is the most marvelous thing. And they celebrate. And Higgins finally feels like, okay, I can turn her into a duchess. And right away, what he wants to do is that he wants to take her to the racetrack. And so he takes her to the racetrack and he dresses her up in her finery, and they're going to lunch with his mother. And actually, we should go back to the previous image. We're not there yet, Joe. So they're going to go and have lunch with his mother and pass her off as a lady. And so the mother inspects her and she's like, well, she looks divine, but she speaks in a strange way. And Higgins is like, but do you think you could call your friends over and we could dine and have a little lunch and try her out? So the mother's like, all right, we can't lose anything. And so like Eliza's there and she's like, hello, how do you do? And the friends are like, we do marvelously. How do you do? I am doing excellently. And so she's been taught to talk about health and the weather. And so they're like, well, what do you think of the weather that we're having? And she's like, I'm enjoying it immensely. Do you know that hurricanes hardly happen in Hampshire? They're like, of course, and so this one young man named Freddie becomes absolutely enamored with her. She's absolutely charismatic and glorious. And then she begins to tell this story in this strange way that she's talking about her aunt, who was done in by an uncle of hers. And they're like, done in as in murdered? And she's like, yes, they had all said that her husband had done her in. And so, well, why did they do her in? For a price of a hat pin. They murdered her for a hat pin? And she's like, until my father gave her gin and woke her up. And they're like, your father gave her gin and woke her up? Gin to her was like mother's milk. And so like, even though she's talking with this accent, she's telling all of these completely like, lower class stories about her aunt being brought around by gin and things like that. And of course, Freddie is completely enamored. He loves the fact that this is a fine lady. Freddie himself is a young and dashing gentleman, but this is a fine lady, but who's got a wicked sense of humor. And that when she bets on a horse named Dover, and the Dover is moving too slow, she yells out at the horse, Dover, move your bleeding arse! And of course, that's when everyone is horrified. The mother says this is impossible, it will never work. But Freddie falls in love with her. So time passes and they get to the point, and yes, we can move to the other image right now. Time passes and they get to the point where they are ready to pass off Eliza at the embassy ball, which is a big event. And so Eliza appears in this beautiful gown with this gorgeous tiara and her hair made up. Not unlike the way that Galatea had been adorned by her admirer, Pygmalion. And so she appears at this ball and she is absolute perfection, and she fools everyone at it. And there's even someone who's brought in, it's another elocution expert, phonetics expert, an ex-student of Henry Higgins, who's going to expose her as a fraud. And he goes around the ball, and he whispers, while she's dancing with the Prince of Transylvania. People are so taken with her beauty and her elegance and the way that she speaks, that she's dancing with the Prince of Transylvania. And so all the ladies gather together. And what we find out later is that she wasn't exposed as a flower girl. Eliza spoke so beautifully and so perfectly that the competing phonetics master, who has been hired by ladies to expose frauds, people are trying to pass themselves as being higher up in society than they are, he declares that her English is practiced. It's not her native tongue. And they're like, oh, what is? And he said, she is a Hungarian princess. And they're like, a Hungarian princess. And that's where everyone is abuzz. So Eliza passes herself off as being a Hungarian princess. So this idea of Venus sextiling Uranus, which is lifting you up to a higher place, and the trine to Neptune, the sort of glamorization and even the pulling off of it. These are basically how these aspects may work in your own life. Now, you may not be going to some embassy ball and singing "The Rain in Spain Will Fall Mainly on the Plain," but it will be something along those lines where you may feel uplifted in some way through your associations, where you might be introducing or entering into a higher part of society or a higher stage of what it is that you do, something that shows you off wonderfully. Now, this will be followed by the Venus-Pluto opposition on June 17th. And this is where the story gets really quite fascinating. We've won the bet. Excuse me a moment here. We're live, so I have to grab some water. Higgins has won the bet, and immediately he and Colonel Pickering could care less about Eliza. They come home from this wonderful evening, and all they can do is talk about their triumph and how the bet was won, and they can laugh, and all they're doing is laughing at how they had fooled everyone. And Eliza is standing there still in her gown and still in her tiara, and she realizes that she was their toy, their thing to play with. Okay, and this is the thing that Venus in Leo can do. People can become enamored with this idea of who you should be, and you can become enamored with it as well, where you want to become that person that people see when they look at you, when they see you as being more talented or more beautiful or more witty, and you want to become that. And you may even become that, but the question still remains, is it you or is it not you? And this is what gets revealed by the end of this part of the musical, and what we see revealed in the Pluto-Venus opposition. You may find that you have entered into a situation, not that you're being an imposter, but you had entered into a situation in which you were very much responding to the expectations that other people had of you, or the desires that they had for you, or their ambitions or their aspirations. And there may be this realization that you're not that person and that you need to take that back. And so Eliza, at this point, when they return from the ball, she begins asking Henry Higgins what she can take with her. And he's like, what do you mean, what can you take with you? She's like, well, I'm from the streets. I'm from the gutters. I want to know what is mine and what is not mine. Is the clothing mine? Are the things that you've given me mine? Or were they just simply on loan? Were they part of your marvelous experiment to pass me off as a duchess. And he's like, no, you can have these things. It's no big deal. But why are you so angry? Why are you being so difficult? Why are you being so moody like a woman? And she's like, I'm merely asking what belongs to me. Now that our venture, our business endeavor, your experiment is done, and I have helped you succeed, I imagine that I am to go on my way, right? And he's like, well, I really hadn't thought about your future. I just sort of thought you'd, hang around. And she's like, well, I need to think about my future. And so she packs the things and she's like, and you're sure that I can take these things? And he's like, yes. And she's like, because I don't want to be accused of theft. And he's like, I'd never accuse you of theft. And she leaves the house, and she leaves the house destitute. She's got nothing, really. She's got no position. She's got no money. She has this learning. She has this speech. She has indeed become a fine lady, but there's nothing for her in society. I mean, what is she really but nothing more than a glorified flower girl? And of course, that's when she runs into Freddie, who's been waiting outside every day to see her. And Freddie declares his love to her and things like that. And she's like, okay, I'm tired of dealing with men, and I just have to go home, and she goes back to her flat to sort of think things over. And so that's what can happen here. There can be this sense of stepping into something which is very elevating of you. It's very complimentary. You're attracting the interest. You succeed at attracting that interest of being elevated in some way. And then it may be followed by some sort of exposure or some sort of harsh disillusionment. And this disillusionment, this exposure, which would be the Venus-Pluto opposition, it's also opposition in the sense that Henry Higgins and Colonel Pickering are wealthy gentlemen, and so they do have control over Eliza, even though they don't really regard themselves that way. But Eliza, being from a lower class, is very aware of what that means and very aware of the problem and the fix that she is in. So she leaves for a little while, and then she meets with Higgins's mother, and then she returns to Higgins later. Higgins, by the way, has realized that he treated her shabbily and it was horrible, but at the same time, he's annoyed with her for being so oversensitive and girly and things like this. So she returns to Higgins, and this is where I want to bring in the Venus trine Saturn, which will be taking place on June 25th. She returns to Higgins, and Higgins is just as insulting of her as he's always been, just as bullying as he has always been. And she says to him, and he's like, come back to the home, and this is where you'll be. And she's like, I can't be that anymore. And he's like, well, why can't you be that anymore? She's like, because when you look at me, you see a flower girl. But when Colonel Pickering, for instance, looks at me, and he's like, yes, my dear. And she says, he sees a lady. To Colonel Pickering, I am a lady, a duchess perhaps, but for you, I will always be a flower girl. And he's like, that's ridiculous. You're being silly. Get back upstairs to your room and whatever. And she's like, no, I won't. And in fact, I don't need you anymore. And he's like, you don't need me anymore. Who do you think clothed you, fed you, gave you money? Of course you need me. I own you. And she's like, no, you do not. And he's like, well, whatever will you do with yourself? And she was like, whatever will I do with myself? Well, Professor Higgins, what I'm going to do with myself is that I'm going to teach phonetics, just like you. Teach phonetics, just like me. What a preposterous claim. And she's like, not really. You're not the only person who can turn a flower girl into a duchess. I can do that too. I know how it was done. And that's exactly what I'm going to do with other people. He's like, well, then I will expose you. And she's like, not before I expose you first, as passing me off as a duchess to your friends, when indeed I was no such thing. He's like, oh. And Pickering's like, well, Higgins, she's got a point with you there. And he's like, and she's like, so what I will do is set myself up in an establishment. And he's like, but where will you live? What will you do? And she's like, I will marry Freddie. And Higgins is like, Freddie, that ridiculous man-child, that little gentleman, Freddie. And she's like, yes, I will marry Freddie, because Freddie will allow me to build my own business and to become everything that I was meant to be. And in Freddie's eyes, I am already a lady. And so that is something that you you can never give me. And that's basically the end of the play. And Bernard Shaw was in a bit of a quandary because everyone was expecting Higgins and Eliza to get together, but Bernard Shaw was completely against that. I mean, Higgins is in his 30s, and in the play, Eliza is like 18. It's like, that's not going to happen. I mean, he was very well acquainted with the Pygmalion myth with Galatea, and he's like, no, 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 that's not what's going to happen here. And he really wanted it to be a romance of the minds, you know. And Higgins says, well, you can marry Freddie, but I can assure you, Eliza, one day you will come back here and you will live with me and Colonel Pickering, and you will grow old as a bachelor just alongside the two of us. So Higgins's view of their future is that the three of them will make bachelors living in the same, you know, in the same building, in the same house, with everything provided for. And the reason why I bring this with a Venus trine Saturn is that Venus trine Saturn brings longevity, okay? And it also brings the fumbles and stumbles that can come about. You might not have gotten together with the person in the right way, or maybe you went through a disenchantment or something along those lines, but usually following a disenchantment or a disillusionment, that Saturn kicks in when it trines the Venus, and it gets the Venus to look further down the road, you know, to see things in the bigger picture. And what Eliza has done is that she has forged an alliance with Higgins, much like the alliance she has forged with Freddie. With Freddie, she'll be married and have money. With Higgins, there's a contemporary. There is, you know, someone who understands what she does, and she understands what he does. And actually, she can teach him a few things because everything had been modeled on her, something that Higgins never understood. And so these relationships actually end up supporting Eliza. These relationships end up supporting Eliza in what she wants to do. And she switches the table from being beholden to these men in her life to actually being a peer, to being a contemporary. And that is one of the great lessons that Saturn trining Venus can teach. Now we're going to take a break here, and then we'll come back with the rest of the planetary aspects for the month of June. Hello, and welcome back to the June Horoscope Live. I hope you're enjoying this live presentation of the horoscopes for this upcoming month of June. On June 21st, the sun enters the astrological sign of Cancer. Summer is a lullaby season. Days are long, nights are short, and you can sleep out under the stars if you like. Everything you could possibly wish for is within reach. You can pluck fruit from the trees, pull vegetables out of the soil, or hook a fish while lazily dozing on the riverbank. Summertime is when the living is easy because Mother Nature is here to provide. And like an infant suckling at the breast, you can nestle peacefully knowing that you are well cared for. Now, you might suddenly laugh and say, I wish, but this dream of abundance is encoded into the very essence of the summer season. In fact, you are so enthralled by this idol that even if you know it's not true, that won't stop you from striving to make it true for those you love and care about. This is the way life should be. And now that the sun is in the zodiac sign of Cancer, you will endeavor to make it happen. Signs most affected are Cancer, Leo, Scorpio, and Pisces. Another planetary aspect taking place on June 21st is the first quarter moon in Libra. It looks like the other party will agree to your terms, courtesy of the first quarter moon in Libra. This is a waxing energy, when the moon is growing in light, and given the strong influence of Venus, Libra's ruler, it appears as if everyone will be happy with the outcome. Now, whether they're happy on the inside or not remains to be seen, but it's best not to press for that now. Praise people for their generosity, thank them for their time and patience, and assure them that you are looking forward to future dealings. This will do a lot to assuage any bruised egos. Signs most affected are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. On June 25th, the sun will form a square to Neptune. Neptune glamorizes whatever zodiac sign it's passing through, and right now it's going to be romanticizing the grittier aspects of Aries. Now everyone has Aries somewhere in their horoscope, so this will be the part of you that believes that you have to go it alone and that you can't possibly rely on anyone else. That might be true, but then again, it might not. Sun-Neptune squares, like the one taking place today, are astrology's myth busters. They lift the veil on the stories we've been telling ourselves. Maybe it's time to stop overcompensating and to let the real you shine through. It's not a weakness to want to bond with someone else. It's human. Signs most affected are Gemini, Virgo, Libra, and Aquarius. On June 28th, Mars enters the zodiac sign of Gemini. Mars enters Gemini on June 28th, turning up the heat on any low-burning disagreement, smoldering rivalry, or forgotten feud. You may think that you get along with everyone you meet, but Mars, in the turnabout sign of the twins, will quickly disabuse you of that notion, especially when tensions flare up with loved ones and friends. And this will be more than just a case of people being oversensitive. You're going to hear a lot about past slights and repressed resentments. This is why you will want to handle tempers gingerly. Choose your words carefully, because anything you say will be taken out of context and used against you. It may prove so bewildering at times that you could swear you've been transported to some mirror universe where people look the same but act totally the opposite. And that might not be the worst way of approaching situations until you get a fuller grasp of what's going on. Mars will be in Gemini from June 28th until August 11th. Signs most affected are Aries, Gemini, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Aquarius, and Pisces. On June 29th, Mercury turns retrograde at the last degree of Cancer. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but do you know that it's been 13 years since Mercury turned retrograde in the zodiac sign of Cancer? When Mercury entered the zodiac sign of Cancer on June 1st, you might have been under the impression that you had successfully resolved a family matter, come out ahead with a property sale, or finalized plans for remodeling or renovating your home. And over the past couple of weeks, as Mercury slowed down its speed in the sky, you probably began to notice that things weren't going to go as planned. Maybe loved ones proved uncooperative. That sale of yours got tied up in paperwork, or your contractors did a underwhelming job. Mercury retrograde in Cancer today signals a do-over for you. It may feel like a huge inconvenience, but actually, this is your chance to regain what you lost, to secure the funding that was denied you, or to finally get that job done right. Mercury will be retrograde in the zodiac sign of Cancer from June 29th until July 23rd. Signs most affected are Gemini, Cancer, Virgo, Scorpio, and Pisces. Now, another aspect that will be taking place on June 29th is the full moon in the zodiac sign of Capricorn. The full moon in Capricorn often brings sober realizations that lie somewhere between buyer's remorse and morning after regret. What's important during a time like this is to be honest with yourself. If you did something wrong, be honest about it. And if you stopped short of doing everything you could have done to prevent a situation or remedy a matter, then be honest about that too. There's nothing to be gained by self-recrimination or manufacturing excuses for your behavior. The only thing you can do is follow that Capricorn tenet of taking responsibility for your actions. Not only does this allow you to acknowledge a misstep and to learn from it, it also gets you thinking about where to go from here. None of us can take back something we wished never happened, but we can make up for it in the future. And for you, that future starts today. Signs most affected are Aries, Taurus, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. On June 30th, Jupiter enters the zodiac sign of Leo. A new chapter begins when Jupiter, the planet of good fortune and higher purpose, enters Leo. Leo is ruled by the sun, the source of heat and light. And for the next year, solar energy will kindle your sense of higher purpose so that you become the shaping force in your own life. You see, it's not up to fate or circumstances to determine what you make of yourself. It's up to you. You will feel a moral responsibility to realize your inner potential, whether it's a talent, gift, or calling. This is a galvanizing and fulfilling time for you, as long as you don't settle for second best or allow yourself to be pigeonholed by others' expectations. Signs most affected are Aries, Leo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. Now we're going to take another quick break and come back to you with some parting statements. See you soon. Hello, and welcome back to the June horoscope. I think that a theme that runs through the month of June is this idea of the way that people see you and of fulfilling those expectations while at the same time still holding on to your own particular identity. This is something that might show up with some of the Venus modern planet aspects that we spoke about. And it kind of leads into this Jupiter going into Leo at the end of the month, where there's going to be much more of a sense of like you're the person who makes your own fate. You make your own fortune. You make your own way in the world. Oftentimes we think that when we have to do that, we have to do it through some sort of embattlement. You know, we have to do it by throwing our weight around and shoving people about or something like that. When we're dealing with energies that are represented by Gemini and Cancer, those things aren't so blunt. They're not so obvious. They're not so in your face. They're much more subtle. And I think that with the transitions that the planets are making this month and the aspects that they're forming to one another, it's this idea of really drawing upon yourself and your own personal capacities. You know, whether it's a new moon in Gemini, which could make you feel like you're being torn in all sorts of different directions because of its proximity to Uranus and the idea of bending with it, of working with it, or whether it's Venus going through those aspects to the modern planets, where in the story Eliza goes from, you know, someone who had been objectified as something to be improved and turned into something better, into someone who really masters her own fate. She masters her own future. She kind of turns the tables on a mentor that had bullied her, and she becomes her own woman. And so these may be themes that you might be facing in your own life, themes where you are turning the tables on situations, not in an overt way, but in a way that's perhaps more Venusian, which is more agreeable, or ways in which you are learning to speak for yourself. You might begin feeling like you can't speak for yourself, or that you're being looked down upon or even beholden, but you may discover by month's end that you actually are ready to take the reins of your life, to enter into this period of time when Jupiter enters the zodiac sign of Leo, and to change the perspective. It's not fate showering things on you, but it's you stepping into yourself and who you are. And as you step into yourself and who you are, then life responds accordingly. It moves in the direction that you want to move. It doesn't move you around. It moves in the direction that you want to move. Now, before we get to the ads, are there any sort of quick questions or comments that people have about any of the planetary transits or aspects that I addressed today? Okay, well, I guess not. All right, so I think that we can just go to the end. And the end is basically this. I want to remind you again that Uranus will be forming a square to the nodes. Let me back up and make it clear. I want to remind you that the episode Uranus squaring the nodes comes out this Monday, May 25th. And that will be all about the nodes and Uranus basically being at the bending, which means squaring the nodes, and what kind of impact or effect that's going to have on the 12 signs. The other thing that I want you to direct your notice to is that the next monthly horoscope live stream is happening on June 27th at the same time, because we worked out all our technical difficulties today. So it would be happening at the same time, on time. And of course, that next monthly horoscope live will deal with July. And then before the July horoscope, we are going to be having a Chiron in Taurus Q&A for members of Christopher Renstrom Astrology Salon on June 20th. This will be going on with the release of the episode of Chiron and Taurus, where I will be talking about the asteroid Chiron and the myth. Chiron, to me, is a very fascinating character, and the part that it plays in an astrological chart is endlessly intriguing to me. I've known about Chiron for a number of years, but really only began working with it recently. And so Chiron is changing signs this month, and it will be entering into the zodiac sign of Taurus. And that is something that we will be addressing not only in the overview of what Chiron is like in the zodiac sign of Taurus, but the impact that Chiron in Taurus will be having on each of the 12 zodiac signs. And by being a member of the Christopher Renstrom Astrology Salon, you get to engage in that question and answer session, where we will not only talk about Chiron and Taurus, but perhaps, if time allows, where Chiron is in your chart and how it functions there. So again, I want to thank you for all of your patience. I want to thank you for showing up today. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a lovely June, and I will see you next time on the next live. I hope you enjoyed this latest episode exclusively for subscribers to the Christopher Renstrom Astrology Salon. I'm so grateful that you could join me this month. Until next time, take good care, and thank you again for being a part of Christopher Renstrom Astrology Salon.